afternoon, and thank you for joining us today for this webinar on conflict management strategies. My name is Jodi Hammer, and I'm the Career Services Specialist with the National Peace Corps Association. And so I'm happy to be here with you today to do this session on this topic. And I'm looking forward to it being an interactive session. I definitely much prefer to have interactions. So I encourage you to put your questions in the chat box. And I think we have a small enough group. We can certainly even, have you unmute to ask questions at a later time. So excited to be with you here today. And let's go ahead. I'm sorry, I'm having a little bit of camera issues with my video, so you won't see my shining face right now, but you're not missing much. So let's go ahead and talk about conflict management and some of the strategies. So defining conflict, I asked folks in the very beginning when we first got on to spend a few minutes thinking about how do you define conflict? What is conflict to you? And let's see what we have in the chat box, if we have anything that came in here. Yes, incongruent ideas. Excellent. Discord. Yep. Trisha, discord is a big one. That's what conflict causes more often than not. So that can be unfortunate, right? And unpleasant, but it can also be productive. Misunderstanding, or the inability to mitigate power. Another good thought there. So much of today's conflicts, right, result from misunderstandings, whether it's, your tone that somebody interprets differently. And boy, let me tell you, in today's day and age, with all of the, distance learning and the remote work, so much more of our presence is on email. And I don't know about you, but I have definitely had situations where emails just, they don't get perceived, they get misinterpreted. They maybe take something differently than you meant altogether, or vice versa. So that can be a real issue. Thank you so much. That's great. Katrina says she has difficulty receiving the message from the sender. So the conflict could be internal as well. Absolutely. It could be an issue with the other person internal to your organization, but it could also be an internal issue of your own, where maybe you are sensitive to a certain topic, and for whatever reason, maybe you've had experience, and that makes sense that you would develop maybe a sensitivity to that. So you might take that meaning or that message differently than what's intended, right? So absolutely, that can be the issue. Allison adds, and thank you, Allison, not seeing eye to eye and an unwillingness to understand. That's another really good one. Thank you so much. Conflict can, people get in their, camps, right? I'm the pro or the against, for and against. And people can sometimes really, get in those trenches and not be willing to, think about how they might get out of those trenches and come up with a solution that might be able to, meet their various needs and such. So good. Another one came in about conflict, uncertainty over willingness to seek resolution. That's a good point. Yeah. Unwilling, uncertainty. You're not sure if the other party is really willing to kind of compromise. And we're going to talk a lot about, different strategies and stuff as well. So absolutely. So great. That's some really good answers. Thank you, everyone. I really appreciate that. So when thinking about, conflict, is it, good or bad? It seems like so far the definitions that people have put out have been more of the, conflict is, there's difficult aspects of it, and it's not agreeing. And so they are all parts of conflict, right? So it's been focusing kind of on that, the issue. It's an issue. It's not, hey, we all agree, let's go forward. That's not conflict. That's the absence of conflict, right? So is it good or bad, right? So I want to talk to you a little bit about, conflict can be good or bad. And I should probably phrase that as, there's pros and cons to conflict, right? And yeah, sometimes it's both. It's not just all good or all bad either. So absolutely. So some of the, positive or negative aspects. Let's look first at some of the negative, right? It's obviously unrealistic to try to avoid conflict altogether, right? We need to deal with it. It's a part of life. and of every part of life, right? So we're going to be talking a lot actually about like workplace conflicts and an example, but I'm going to bring in also some personal life conflicts and struggles, whether you're a parent or, caring for, aging parents, things like that too. There can be conflicts that you face at home as well, and those are just as important and good to talk about. So the issue that I see is, unaddressed conflicts. They just fester and they grow, right? So they become bigger. And a lot of times we're not addressing them because we're either uncomfortable with maybe the topic, or maybe we're uncomfortable with conflict, right? And that's a really common occurrence. A lot of people don't like conflict. I mean, most people wouldn't say, I love conflict, right? But they can acknowledge that there might be some positive things about it. But there are people who really go to extra lengths to avoid conflict because it is so uncomfortable based on, their own experience. It may have been, with a parent or growing up, or, a role model, or, something like that as well, where maybe conflict was just not a good thing, or it was always, pushed down and like, nope, we don't address that. We just leave it, there, the elephant in the room oftentimes. But the negativity that surrounds conflict, like if it's unresolved or there's not action taken, that can really produce issues with productivity on your team, or whether you're talking about a job or a board that maybe you sit on because you believe in the mission and the organization, right? It can have really negative impacts on that. And it can also damage staff morale. If you have a lot of conflict on a team or in a division, it can really get to people. And honestly, you can have turnover because of that. Some people are just like, I'm done. I'm not going to deal with this. I'm going to go where I am appreciated and where there's not this conflict all the time. So that can be a really, and sometimes that has to do with maybe there's a toxic, boss or coworker or who knows, and that can be really challenging, right? So the key comes down to with conflict, right? Knowing how to manage it, and then also to diffuse conflict and try to get through it, right? Because it is a part of life. And I have several screenshots that are some quotes that I really like in this as well. So let's go ahead and talk briefly about how conflict can also be good. Yep, there's definitely positive aspects of conflict, right? It can help you to think about new ideas in a new way, right? When you can actually listen and hear the other party or parties, and you can actually like commit yourselves to working through it together and figuring out the best alternative. And it's not always your way or the highway. It can't be, right? You need to be willing to, obviously, and we'll talk more about that as well. But you can really get some amazing new ideas and, an increased sense of team spirit, right? And I love this graphic here, with, the like kind of superpowers, like together we're stronger than one, right? Then and we all are superpowers, and we can come together and really affect change. And I think that's so true, right? It can, and so the positive aspect of conflict being that it results in change, and positive change that can be helpful for the organization and for all of that. So absolutely. And then the outcomes, really, whether or not it's going to be positive or negative outcome, is largely dictated by how that conflict is managed, right? Because if it isn't managed well, and that could be by the formal manager, your formal supervisor, right? It could be the person that is the team lead for a specific project. They might have the power, whatever. And if they're not managing it well, that can be an issue too. So absolutely, it's not always the buck stops here, the final manager that we're talking about. So great. All right, so let's go on and talk a little more. I like this quote. And there, this is more like an education kind of realm, but it's really it's applicable to all, right? It's just, conflict's a part of life, right? And it's a normal part of the cycle of life. And it can be managed, right? There's not always a resolution, maybe not always resolved with effective communication skills. So I think and we're going to talk about some of the ways to, deal with conflict and how to, become more adept at doing that. And ultimately it comes down to, in large part, communication skills. And we've done some webinars, our professional development webinars. We have done one on improving your, communication skills and things like that. And you can always, look those up on our Global Reentry playlist on YouTube. And we're fairly soon, when our website redesign is done, we're going to have a page where we'll have all of those easily referenced under nice categories and such for you also. So that should help. So great. Let's see here. Let's go ahead. And I love this quote here, right? Conflict is a part of life. It need not be a way of life. I mean, that's so short and so simple, and yet I think so powerful, right? Yes, we acknowledge that we are going to deal with conflict as a part, one of many parts of life, but it doesn't need to be the way of life. And you don't want to be in a situation where it's constantly conflict and that's consuming your life, because that's not a fun place to be all the time. We may learn a lot about it through the process, but nobody wants to be in like conflict the majority of their life, or the majority of their working in their work life or whatever. That might be a cause for thinking about getting a new job, looking for a new job if it's in a work environment, right? So great. So I want you all to spend a few minutes here thinking about good versus bad, your own experience, okay, of conflict. I want you to think of some good and some bad examples of conflict and the outcome that you've experienced when working in a team environment. And then I want you to think about what was the difference. So what I really want in the chat box, I mean, you can put all, but really what was the difference between the two? What made it good versus a bad example of conflict? Thank you, everyone, in advance for your contributions. You're doing great so far. People have been active in the chat box, and I appreciate that. Good. We've got some good questions coming in too. Those are great. And I will get to questions, I promise. We will definitely get to some of those as well. Thank you. That's what I want. I want as many questions as you want to ask. Absolutely. And I'm going to share some resources as well on, I think, some really good articles on how to, help resolve conflict to follow up on this session. Absolutely. Okay. So what do we have here? Let's see. All righty. So we have, it looks like, those who mediated made it better. So Katrina, you're saying that the good versus bad, in the good example that you can think of, the people who mediated the conflict made it better. They did a good job of mediating it another way, in other words, right? So that people felt heard, or they felt that they were part of the process. Good, very good. Sarah says receptivity to listen to the other person's viewpoint, even if you don't agree. Absolutely, Sarah. And sometimes that's so hard to do because people get so entrenched in their camp, or this is the right way, this is the way we should do this, that it's hard for them to really, truly open up and listen to the other side. And sometimes when you're able to actually do that without judgment, just try to listen and put your judgment aside, you can actually hear, well, that could maybe be an alternative, or maybe that would solve this other issue. Well, maybe we could come to, or it could get you closer to a solution that might be in between. So wonderful, great. Another person writes in the chat here, disagreement over an idea, good, versus disagreeing with the person. That is a great one, right? How often don't these conflicts, they become more about the people? Oh, this person is so sensitive, he always wants this, or he's very this, or she's very that, or people get kind of entrenched almost in more who the people are versus what's the conflict that we're dealing with. Let's take it out of whose mouth it came out with, of the ideas and such, and let's really look at it from that. Great example. And Katrina, you added Yes, the bad example. Yeah, people's emotions were not addressed. Yeah, and when people's emotions, if they're not addressed and they're more just suppressed, right? And pushed down and not regarded in making the decision, you're going to have some cleanup work later, sooner or later. If you want to get through it, you're really going to need to clean it up, right? So unfortunately, I think what happens is you have these kinds of things that happen, and then it makes the work environment more difficult, and then more difficult, and it becomes almost more toxic. And then it's really hard to go in and just let's dig the trenches out. Let's get through this. So that's I think sometimes the real challenge. So great. Wonderful. So Trisha shares that in the good example of conflict from her experience, facts were expressed with logical reasoning that won the group over, right? So awesome. Yes. The facts and logical reasoning, calmness, probably, right? A positive presence, a collaborative spirit, all those kinds of things, right? Would have that effect of winning someone over and be more productive. And lastly, here we have Matt, who shared dog and pony show during the conflict issue, but the conflict really was not addressed at the core of the issue. Absolutely. Yep. So they in other words, it sounds like, Matt, they dealt with it on a surface level to say that they've done it, right? Kind of that dog and pony show type of thing, right? And yet they didn't get to the crux of the issue. So then you still had the same issue that was haunting, the team, the organization, all of that. Absolutely. Yeah, that can be very, very hard. Yes. All right. So conflict management, right, really is the same as conflict resolution, right? It's how you're going to resolve it. And I just liked this graphic was very like, okay, teams can have very different ways of being, or can be in conflict. I think that there's no doubt that there's conflict going on from this picture here, right? It's not always that obvious, but I thought that was a funny one, and I wanted to inject a little bit of humor at least. So yes, and you don't have to be the manager to be the one who's working with conflict management or conflict resolution, right? And this is a skill that's going to serve you really well as you move toward maybe wanting to move up either in your organization or in other organizations, knowing how to resolve conflicts, being able to, when people ask you in an interview, tell me about an example of a time you've dealt with a conflict in a team environment and how you handled that. So those kinds of things, it'll help you be better prepared, the more you know about it, and it'll prepare you better for being a supervisor or thought leader or whatnot. I like this graphic as well, this quote here, just about team members, and the better they're able to listen, engage, hear, interpret, and respond constructively, right? Keyword there, the more likely their team is to leverage conflict rather than be leveled by it. And I like that because I see conflict being, it can either level teams and completely destroy teams, right? Or it can help you to get to a better place, to new ideas, to new approaches, to more productivity, all those kinds of things. So the emphasis is really on not seeking to avoid conflict altogether, but rather dealing with it. It ultimately comes down to respect. Dealing with conflict in whatever example of conflict you have in a team environment, dealing with it respectfully, engaging people, listening, right? And I have a graphic that's going to come up here in just a moment that it goes over a lot of this. But those simple things that you can do, and with communication related, that kind of thing, can be super helpful. So the types of workplace conflicts, right? There's a lot of different types of conflicts that happen at work, right? One of the biggest ones, of course, leadership conflict, right? Each leader is different. So I'm sure you can probably think of some of your former bosses where maybe you feel they were great leaders and they really, like had a strong team and, just ran a really, good environment, and department or agency or whatever, right? And I'm sure many of you can also think of examples of when you didn't have that, when the leadership, your boss's boss, whoever, was not that way. And that ultimately makes a huge difference, right? If you have a boss who is not at all supportive of, like engaging and listening and all of that, who does not have good conflict resolution skills themselves, it's very difficult, right? Not impossible, but it can be very difficult. And their personalities are different. Some people are very fine with letting you take it and run with it, and you just do it in the team, whatever. Others are like maybe micromanagers who they want to be in at every step of the way, and that can be more difficult to handle. Interdependency based conflicts, I mean, that can be, that can go into, for example, how the team is split up. Maybe it's team roles that are interdependent on each other, and there's probably in many cases not a boss per se, there's a working team. And so you have somebody from the comms department and somebody from the programming department, and you both have to work together. And that can be, you might have very different styles, which can actually get to this next point, right? The working style differences, right? I mean, you can think of, even the Myers-Briggs, where you have, the personality inventory, right? Where you have like the ENFPs, the extrovert, intuitive, feeling and perceiving. They're all about the ideas and bringing people together and like making sure everyone is okay, in the team, that type of thing, right? And that's me, for example. I'm a very clear ENFP. And then you have those who are the opposite, who are maybe, they want that mission driven, and that's great. I mean, it takes all types, and they're really good, at making things move ahead and having, they want to have documents and this, and, and it's, the great thing is it's important, or the important thing is we want to be able to all work together anyway. But sometimes those styles can create little or sometimes bigger conflicts, right? If you're working with somebody very different style, maybe you're putting together a presentation, and one person is, wants to have, 2 weeks for the research, just the research, and then this, and very scheduled on that. And the other person's not that way, that can be difficult. But a lot of times you can adapt your style too, right, for that situation. So that can obviously help as well. Another type of workplace conflict would be culture-based, where you're from different backgrounds, different cultures, right? Diversity in any way, right? Of and every way, right? We all are different in our own ways, and so there can be some issues with that as well. And I think the exciting thing is, I think the positive thing is, right now there is a lot of like D&I work taking place, and diversity and inclusion, and a lot of things, making sure that workplaces are hopefully improved in that regard. So that's the exciting thing that's coming from it. But there definitely are some cultural, based, issues that might, come into play. Somebody maybe, takes something a different way, or says something that might, offend somebody else, and they may or may not feel comfortable calling them on it in a respectful way, and then that can kind of feed into, oh, they're this way, or those kinds of things. So, and then lastly, just as another example, and there are many examples, right? But your personality clashes. There are people who are different in personalities, right? And some personalities get along great, some not as much. But your challenge and your goal is to be able to work with all personality types. You may not seek out specific ones always, but it's really good, and it's going to help you for your own development to be able to work with people who have very different styles from you as well. That can absolutely help. Now, I want to remind you to put questions into the chat box as we're going on here. And I know there are a few questions, so I definitely want to look in the chat box here and see what we have right now. But you can look at this right now. You can look at this graphic by one of my favorites, Balanced Career. They do a really good job with career advice and such. And this talks about many of the different ways to, the skills that are involved with conflict resolution, right? So if you are a person who can develop these different skills, you're going to be, that's going to help you a very long way. And one of the biggest ones is empathy, right? Being able to, hear and kind of put yourself to some degree, at least in that situation, kind of empathize. Wow, that, you know, that must be difficult, or, you know, and really working through those kinds of things, bringing empathy instead of just that, you know, logic, this plow through, you know, there's no feeling like of being heard. And that's the other one, right? Interviewing and active listening. You know, I've said in some of the different webinars, you know, we were given, you know, one mouth and two ears for a reason, right? There's a saying about that that's catchier than what I just said, but it's that whole using them in that, you know, in that manner, right? Listen more than you're talking. And by listening, you will be able to hear the other side or the issues, the other, you know, when people are talking about them, and you'll be able to engage in, you know, that like working together to, you know, maybe come up with an approach that meets, you know, many of the needs, let's say, right? And creative problem solving comes from that as well, right? The great thing is you in Peace Corps got so much of this, right? Conflict resolution skills. I mean, who didn't have an issue with their community that they had to work through? Of course, probably, you know, many times daily, weekly, monthly, whatever, when you were trying to do different things happen and you work through it. And there might be cross-cultural things. They might be funding or government accountability or not showing up or whatever things. And you make it work. You made it work. So I just want you all to realize, to recognize, and kind of give yourself a pat on the back that you are already probably good at this, better than you might give yourself credit for. Okay. Facilitating, obviously, you know, let's talk, you know, opening that, you know, let's, you know, I'd love to hear more about what you're saying, you know, when, you know, instead of this is the right way and this is what we should do, kind of, well, tell me a little more about what you're thinking. And I'd love to hear that. And that goes a long way, right? Because people see that as you meeting them halfway, you listening, you wanting to work on a solution together, not just like, you know, overriding assertiveness, more, you know, working, you know, being willing to speak your piece and being willing to say, you know, and engage the other side and all parties in, you know, in working toward a solution is really important. Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm cutting out. My internet is saying, my internet is saying that it's unstable. Give me one moment. Sorry, let's try this again. Maybe I can make somebody else a host and then go out and come back in. Is it still cutting out? Is it
No,
still?
I can hear you.
Okay, you can hear me. I have my camera off or it wasn't coming on. So great. Hopefully, if it does continually do that, shoot me that message in the chat box or unmute yourself and just tell me. I'm so sorry about that. For whatever reason, my internet is showing as unstable. I haven't had this issue very much, but the last couple days I have. So, okay, let's see. So let's go to a couple of the questions that came up. We have, Trisha asks, if a manager or director knows the team well, she would know which kinds of challenges to offer to different personality types so they feel valued. That is absolutely right, Trisha. And in an ideal world, that's exactly what should happen, that all managers would take that into account and assign appropriate ones to different people so they feel they have success and they feel valued. Unfortunately, that's not always the case. So am I still cutting out here? Someone just sent me a message. I could try to make somebody else a host. Oh, good. You're good. Okay, excellent. Thank you. Good. So yes, that would be the so that's absolutely right. Thank you, Trisha. That was a good that's a good statement. And in our realistic world, I would say any of you who are moving into management positions, informal or formal, to definitely take that into consideration, to find, and sometimes teams will do, and I'm a strong advocate of this for like team building and staff development. They'll have their staff take, for example, maybe the Myers-Briggs, which is the MBTI that I was, referring to, or there's the strength finders where you have, words that come out that, represent you. And you can really get a lot from that to know, okay, who would work well in this capacity. We can have a working group of the people who are the wooers, right? Versus the, data management or, whatever. So you could separate them into, sometimes subgroups that could be more effective. So absolutely, Trisha, very good, good point. Okay. And there was another question that Judy had on: once a conflict has occurred and I'm at fault, how are ways to repair the damage? Good question. If the other party is at fault, what are ways to forgive and move constructively forward? I like that question, Judy, the two-part. First of all, if it's you that you realize in, introspection and after the fact and whatever, you realize that, that you maybe didn't handle it well, I am a huge advocate of acknowledging that and, making it a safe space for other people to acknowledge, their own shortcomings if they happen. We all have them. Things happen, right? And hindsight is always 2020. So maybe you did the best you could in the moment, but you just didn't really feel right about it. When you went back home and you reflected on it, you realized, I probably should have done X. So to come back with the team and to say, I just wanted to follow up on our conversation yesterday. I left, and really had a chance to think about it more. And I realized in retrospect, it may not have been the best way to handle it. I wish that I had done this instead, or I'm sorry. You're saying I'm sorry for, for what I did. And I would ask you to please come to me if in the future, if you ever feel, there's something that I've done, I want to listen. I want to hear that. So your whole goal is to help the team feel okay with coming to you. And that way it's kind of, okay for them to come to others as well. Oftentimes they might, and they might become more of that person. So that, I think, is the first part. And I'd welcome any thoughts from the audience on this. If you want to put them in the chat box or unmute. I'm going to cover the second part of the question. When the other person is, maybe at fault in a situation, right? I think one thing that you would, well, number one, choose to forgive, right? I don't think people in general, I don't think people are making conscious decisions to hurt other people or say things. I mean, it's not because they necessarily want to hurt them directly. Many times, right? They might be caught in their own, whatever the issue is, and it might be a defensive type of reflection or deflection that, it comes out stronger than maybe what, they intended, right? Because they were feeling hurt or whatever. But I think in that situation, I mean, it's more of you being willing to forgive, right? I don't think you'd want to, I would not suggest going and saying, what you did was wrong. I want to forgive, I want to forgive you. No, you're going to make that decision, right? What you might do, however, is come back to the team as a right, or to the person and, and maybe, to say, hey, I just wanted to touch base regarding, yesterday. I know it was a difficult conversation, and I think yet it was a very important one. I learned a lot from it, and I hope that we all have learned X, Y, Z, and that we can move together in, that type of thing, without putting the blame, without singling out any one person, because that's in front of other people. I mean, if you do need to talk to somebody and there's some kind of issue or conflict with just them, much better to address them on a one-on-one basis rather than in front of a team, because that envelops shame and, feeling, bad, and just, feeling ganged up on. It can come across, all of those. So great. Awesome. There's some good questions coming in here. Let me see what we have. Great. Here we go. There's, if a manager or director knows the team well. Oh, I'm sorry, we've covered that one. There was one more that was coming out. Sorry, I just expanded my chat box so it's easier to read here. How do we employ both empathy and assertiveness within the same conversation? That's a good one. Is there a sequence or timing to it? How to best perfect the art? Okay, so SRM, I'm not sure who that is, but could you give a little bit more detail? It's hard to answer that without maybe like is there an example of what was going on in the group? Was it, coming to resolution on the way to approach a project? Was it just something like that, so that there we could maybe do a little more of an example that might be helpful? And you could certainly take yourself off mute if you would like. That is an option.
Hello, can you hear me?
I can, thanks.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No problem.
This would be like in a one-on-one conversation with someone who you just trying to in the workplace, where just trying to kind of set boundaries, I guess, right? Where you feel
Yep.
like you're either being disrespected, or that person is trying to kind of uh, push their demands on you
Yep.
that you feel have been addressed already previously I mean, you have mentioned already previously that you've either done so or you haven't done it because of other things. Basically, just totally um, not listening to your needs, right? So,
Uh-huh.
how can you be assertive about what your needs are?
And I'm sorry, just go back to, because it cut out for just a moment, when you said they're not empathetic, or they're not whatever to your needs. Was that the manager in this situation or team
Um,
lead?
yeah, yeah. We could say that way. I mean,
Okay.
in different scenarios, I guess this could show up where you're trying to. But the one that came up in my mind immediately was one with a team lead,
Yep.
um, where you're just trying to communicate your needs and how you feel. Either you are not being either listened to, or you feeling disrespected. Just trying to put in
Right, right.
some
Yeah, I
boundaries.
think yeah, depending on the situation, but if you might have a you might want to approach the assertiveness. You're saying that you don't feel that your needs are being met. You might want to approach that one-on-one with the person, the lead. But another way, or maybe in addition to it, when you're coming together as a team, a way that you can emphasize and come from that empathetic, right, empathy approach. You could say things like, I know this is a really difficult process, and there's a lot at stake, and I really value being a part of this team, and having us work together, and I know it's not easy, but like, to just say, I want to make sure we all are able to whatever, hear the whatever that's coming, and I'll listen to it before moving forward. I mean, you could potentially do that as well. But if it's you feeling like you're not heard, if it's more of a one-on-one issue versus a one on the whole team feels the same way you do, if it's more of the one-on-one, I would probably start by approaching the manager, whoever, together. And again, coming from that, I really value being a part of this team, and it hasn't been easy to come up with this, but it's been a very good learning, and learning experience for me. And I'm feeling of late, when we're da 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 da, keep it in the I, right, language. I'm feeling this way, and it's and here's my experience, instead of making those globalizations. Everyone's feeling this, or you are doing this. You don't want to do the you language, right? You language makes people defensive. So it's you more saying, I'm feeling this way, and I'm sure that, and you might even say, I'm sure that's not the intention, but this is how I'm feeling with the way XYZ is, has played out, whatever. Does that make sense? I
Yes,
hope.
definitely. Thank you so much.
Great. Sure, no problem. I mean, oftentimes when people hear you come from a space of non-defensiveness, right? You're not being defensive. you're just, but you're open and you're sharing, right? It can make a huge difference in how they then approach or respond to you. So great. Let's see. Any other? I'm going to go on to the next one here real quick because we're going to talk briefly about conflict management styles. If you do your research, you'll see, I mean, these are the big, there's these 5 different styles, right? And there's a lot of talk on, okay, well, which are the ones that you want to do and not want to do? And some of them, when you hear them said, like when, you instantly think, oh, well, that's a bad one. Why would you ever want to do that? Right. But these are the different styles of how people respond, right, to conflict and what comes out. So you have, everything from, avoiding, right? Like where just suppressing the conflict, like not, and that might be what's happening in your case where you said, they just weren't, acknowledging or whatever. Sometimes that's because either the avoidance can be because either a decision needs to be made super fast and there's no time for even like, we just can't deal with the conflict thing. We just have to go forward, like for whatever reason, there's, something funding or something that's on the line. They have to do it now, yesterday, whatever. So not a great one in general, right? You want to, be able to more, and sometimes it's also when it's not an important type of goal at all. It's such a smidgen, tiny little thing that people aren't going to be making a big deal about it, right? If it's so it's that time, low importance, of achieving the goal and, less important the relationship, right? You can see on the different axes here. So the avoidance, but then competition, right, is more when one, that's more like a sports thing or a game, right? One party's seeking to, they're competing and they want to, win it. It's a competition, not a like collaboration, right? So again, typically, if you are looking for, if you're wanting to invest in the relationship, it's a relationship that's meaningful and important, like your coworkers or like your clients, and it's important to achieve the goal, you're going to have much more success with collaboration, right? Because both parties win in that. When you collaborate, you may not both get everything you want, which is compromise in there too, but with collaboration, you really do. There may be things that it may not be 100% everything gets, but it's collaborating to come up with a new idea or a new way of handling it, right? That takes maybe the strengths of both parties and puts them together, right? So that's a great one. Accommodating, there may be times where a supervisor is like, this isn't that important, I'll just let them, fine, or whoever the leader, you just decide you're just going to accommodate, let the other party, take that one and quote unquote win, if you will. Not that it's supposed to be a win-lose thing, but just letting them, that time not taking the effort, to do the big, collaboration or whatever. And then, compromise, like I said, that's when both are, winning, but also giving up something too. So those are kind of the 5 and the right, there's no one right or wrong strategy, right? It depends on the situation largely. So it's more of you need to be able to respond with with each of the styles, whatever one is most appropriate for the situation that you're in. Any questions coming in here? There is a question from Jennifer. Thank you, Jennifer. Do you know of any programs or organizations that offer training on conflict resolution? I will say there are a ton of organizations that offer conflict resolution, right? It very much depends on the style. Are you looking for a team-based where maybe your team would be contracting somebody to come in? There's a lot of contracting agencies that really focus on HR and staff development and how to work effectively as a team and all of those things. If this is something that you're just wanting to get more insight and experiencing yourself, the good thing is there are many, I mean, Coursera and all these different, LinkedIn Learning and all these different, organizations that are out there that are doing, many of them are doing free, completely free, trainings. So take advantage of this time. And a lot of it's because of COVID, where they're like, hey, everything's virtual. Let's just go ahead and let people, take advantage of this. But, if you Google's your friend. Go to Google and say, best conflict conflict resolution trainings for whatever teams, and see what, comes up, and what, names come up and things like that. They're definitely out there. I can't give you a name per se of one that I would say right now, but they're definitely out there, and there's plenty of them. So great. Good, Sarah. I'm glad you liked the graphic. Let's go on to the next. So the types of team conflict, I think it's important too, just to have a little bit more of a sense of what are the things that divide us as a team, right, versus unite us. And so I like this graphic, and it really shows it helps you to look at, like, what are the root causes of conflict, right? So it could be task conflict, which is on the left, right? So it's a conflict around the way to do a task, the decisions involving, right, how to, when to, what to, right, when you're approaching that. And that's very common. That's one of the most common types, right? We're working in teams, we're on a working group for whatever it is, fundraising or this or that. And there's a lot of different approaches, right? A lot of different people, which bring a lot of different styles, which is awesome, but it also can cause some conflicts. Relationship conflict, yeah, that can be, and kind of what I was talking about, many different things, right? It can be different, like different personalities, different, cultural, backgrounds, or different, just ways of being, right? And so oftentimes, or you may remind them of somebody that maybe they had a negative experience with in the past, right? It could be that, that you look like a person that just was not somebody that they were really close with, or maybe they were hurt by this person, or who knows. So it could be a lot of different things, right? But relationship conflicts can be different. The process conflict, more about like how to do this, what's the right way to do this, right? And I'm a big believer in, there's no one right way, there's some wrong ways, right, without collaboration, without whatever, but there's different ways to approach things. And so trying to figure out what is logistically the best thing. Should we spend X amount of time doing this, then moving on to that? When should we have our first draft done by? Different people have different different preferences, different personalities, different comfort levels. So great. Status conflicts are oftentimes, those are more, it could be that there's a conflict with the boss, right? But, that could be more of a power struggle, like it's saying here, right? But it could be that, maybe there's not a maybe your boss is not in it, but without that boss in it, the status thing, maybe your team is not getting the cred, the credibility, the whatever that they deserve, that you deserve, because there isn't somebody of quote unquote status, which, is unfortunate, but it can happen. So any other questions that you have, please put them in here. And thank you for being here today. The last one here that I'll talk about, organizational conflicts. So that can be, we all know organizations have their own issues, right? Not all organizations have excellent communication. Not all organizations have excellent work-life balance, values that are shared. There's a lot of organizational, it can be dysfunction, if you will, or conflict. So that can also cause issues. And so it's learning to deal with all kinds of those, right? I love this quote right here, right? And this is just getting into the conflict management in relationships, right? But it's as much for teams as it is for relationships, but I'm going to spend just a couple minutes here on relationships, and then we'll close up. And any final questions that you have, please let me know and put those in the chat box. But the goal of resolving conflict in a relationship is not victory or defeat. It's reaching understanding and letting go of our need to be right. And it's that last line, right? 2 lines, letting go of our need to be right. I feel like in our society, many times we are brought up to, or we become this when we get into the working world or whatever. It's like, we've got to be right. There's this insatiable need, right, to be right. And yes, but this is the right way. This is the way to do it, right? And by letting go of that need, we can open ourselves up to, what's the what's the negative impact if we're not right? Like, what, that doesn't mean that we're not good people. Doesn't mean that we're not competent. It doesn't mean, you know, all these things, but just trying to be able to let go of that and work together versus, you know, that whole competition. I really like that one. And then, you know, for those of you who are parents or, you know, spouses, but, you know, conflict resolution, it's not just workplace, right? I mean, conflict resolution skills are important in every aspect of our life. And for those of you who don't have children yet, or maybe won't have children or didn't have children, you know, they can be, for those of you who do, there's just a few things that I have to share here. I love this graphic, right? You know, that whole stepping back and just listening. And I think this can be so applied to every other aspect as well. So even if you don't have kids, right? Listening and not trying to fix the situation, you know, right away. It just gives that time to process, right? And problem solve, you know, with them. And I see this a lot with I have an 8-year-old daughter who's lived through COVID, and it's been, you know, a challenge, and it is tough, and they don't have their, you know, support system and their friends and, you know, school. She was trapped here with her 2 parents and, you know, in a tiny house. So, you know, asking questions instead of, you know, asking questions beyond just, you know, what's wrong, right? You know, just asking questions to kind of get a little more insight, and hopefully, you know, they then open up and can share that. But also letting kids work it out when possible, because they're going to need to do this too, right? So not being that like helicopter parent or whatever, where you're always there and you're always there to work it out and to, you know, have them. No, you want them to be able to do this on their own, because it'll better train them for the future. So that's important as well. So, and then, yeah, and helping them through it, right, in whatever, you know, way you can. So, any questions? I'm at the Q&A screen, which is my last one slide here. And if that's just fine, if you have to leave now, I completely understand. Any final questions? People, feel free to unmute yourself if you have any. I'm very open to that.
Jodi, it's a great talk.
Great. I'm glad you've enjoyed it. Who is the speaking?
This is Judy.
Oh, Judy. Thank you. Thank you, Judy. And thanks for your questions and your comments. You had some really good things to offer and share. I really appreciate that, as always.
Thank you.
All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing here and stop the recording. And then if you have any other questions, please let me know. Thanks so much and have a great day.